Hola! So today we're going to learn about shoe verbs. They're also called stem-changing verbs. The learning objectives are that you will be able to name some of the verbs that stem change in Spanish, conjugate stem-changing verbs in Spanish, and apply the spelling changes in context when needed. So there are these types of verbs in Spanish called stem changers. I like to call them shoe verbs. And if you look at the picture, you'll see why. Some verbs, when you conjugate them, take a spelling change in the stem in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros. So if you leave nosotros and vosotros outside of the shoe and outline the ones that do take the spelling change, it leaves you with a shoe shape. And it's just a visual reminder to help you remember which forms of the verb need to take the spelling change and which ones don't. There are there's more. There are certain categories of shoe verbs in Spanish. Some of them, the E will change to IE, and then some of the examples of that are cerrar, empezar, entender, tener, venir, querer, and some of these we've seen already, and now you know that they fall into a category of something called E to IE stem-changing verbs, or like I said, shoe verbs. Sometimes you'll hear them called boot verbs. It all depends on who your teacher is. Another category is the O to UE and sometimes U to UE. Some verbs that fall into that category are almorzar, dormir, jugar, volver, and poder. And the letter in red is the one that takes the spelling change. So, for example, almorzar, the O is going to change to UE when you conjugate it in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros. Another category is E to I. In these verbs, the E in the stem changes to I in all forms except nosotros and vosotros. So, decir, pedir, and servir. All of these will stem change the E to I. So let's see how they look. Entender means to understand, and when you conjugate it, the E, the second E in the stem, will change to IE in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros. So there you see you have the shoe. Yo entiendo, tú entiendes, él, ella, or usted entiende. Nosotros entendemos, vosotros entendéis, and ellos, ellas, or ustedes entienden. As you can see, the verbs, the conjugated forms of the verb inside the shoe take the spelling change in the stem, and the ones outside of the shoe, the nosotros and vosotros forms, do not. Here's an example of O to UE. Dormir means to sleep, and when you conjugate it, the O is going to change to UE in all of the forms except nosotros and vosotros. So you get yo duermo, tú duermes, él, ella, or usted duerme, nosotros dormimos, vosotros dormís, and ellos, ellas, and ustedes duermen. Now, it's important to remember that just because these verbs take a spelling change, you still have to pay attention and ask yourself, what kind of verb is this? Because we have shoe verbs that are AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. So you still need to make sure that you're adding the appropriate ending for whatever kind of verb it is. Dormir is an IR verb, so you need to pay attention and make sure that you're adding the IR verb endings. Here's another example. This one is an E to I shoe verb. Pedir means to ask for or order something, for example, in a restaurant. What kind of verb is pedir? Before we even attempt to conjugate it, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of verb is pedir? AR, ER, or IR? It's an IR verb. So we need to make sure we're adding the IR verb endings. And then we also need to apply that spelling change in the stem for all the forms except nosotros and vosotros. So when you conjugate it, yo pido, tú pides, él, ella, or usted pide. Nosotros pedimos, doesn't take the spelling change. Vosotros pedís, no spelling change. Ellos, ellas, or ustedes piden. So go ahead, pause the video, and try to apply the spelling changes or the stem changes to these shoe verbs, and then I'll go over the answers with you. Cerrar for tú, cierras. AR verb, so it gets the AR verb ending. Preferir for ellos, prefieren. It's an IR verb, and it's the second E that stem changes. So it's not the first E, it's the second E in the stem. Prefieren. Venir for ella, viene. Querer for nosotros, queremos. This one doesn't take the spelling change. Why? Because it's the nosotros form, and that's outside of the shoe, so there's no spelling change needed. Jugar for ustedes, juegan. Remember, jugar is an AR verb. Takes the U to UE spelling change and add the AR verb ending. Volver for vosotros. Oops. Should be volvéis. I made a mistake in my PowerPoint. No stem change needed because it's the vosotros form. I conjugated it for nosotros, which wouldn't take the spelling change either. Almorzar for yo, almuerzo. Servir for ellas, sirven. Decir for nosotros, decimos. Again, in this form, we don't need to take the spelling change because it's in the nosotros form. Pedir for él, pide. Time to check yourself. Can you name some of the verbs that stem change in Spanish? Can you conjugate stem changing verbs in Spanish? And will you apply the spelling changes in context when needed? Now, the bad news about stem changing verbs is that there's really no rules or any way to help us remember which ones stem change and which ones don't. You're just going to have to memorize them when you learn the verbs.